Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar tonight. My name is Barbara Grosh. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. The League is a nonpartisan organization. We never endorse parties or candidates. Instead, we try to help as many people as possible become well-informed voters and to cast thoughtful votes. So tonight we have with us Duwaine Bascoe. Duwaine is a local lawyer, and he's going to be talking with us about the president and the courts. Uh, you all probably know that the National League has declared that we are in a constitutional crisis, so we're all, of course, trying to keep track of what's going on in terms of constitutional issues. So Duwaine is mostly a employment lawyer. He does all kinds of employment law, including things like discrimination and harassment. And he's also a bit of an activist in the local legal community. So I'm going to give him the floor in a minute. Duwaine said that he'd be happy to take questions because he wants to make sure and cover uh, what's of interest to those of us here tonight. Since there's so much to talk about, we don't want to wait until the last minute. So if you have questions that you'd like to raise or issues you'd like to suggest, please feel free to raise your hand, in which case we can call on you or put your question into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and refer the questions to our speaker. Okay, Duwaine, take it away.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for welcoming me in for this meeting. As Barbara stated earlier, I am more interested in answering any questions that you may have, just because as we go through and discuss this, it's hard to believe that it's only been 10 months and as far as where we are right now. Um, and there are many areas that the administration has touched on and set up new barricades and blockades for, and some of them are outright destroying agencies. So whether it be dealing with deportation, birthright citizenship, DEI, the independencies of agencies, federal agencies, attack on law firms, attack on education, attack on public health, the environment, voting rights, labor laws, you name it. And I don't believe there hasn't been one facet of life that hasn't been touched on by an executive order. As it pertains to what's currently happening in the attempts to push back against some of these um, policies and executive orders. Just to give you an idea of the breadth of what's transpiring in the last 10 months, there have been over 200 executive orders issued. I believe it's around 212. It may have increased since I last checked on it, but roughly around 212 executive orders issued. That's not including over 100 proclamations that have been issued in regards to either directly from the president or from an agency acting in accordance with their policies, their new stated policies and procedures, and 54 memorandums of law. Well, I shouldn't say memorandums of law, but memorandums that have gone out from federal agencies or edicts gone out from federal agencies that are to provide guidance on the policies that have been instructed from the executive branch. So when you take a look at over 200 executive orders, over 100 proclamations, and over 50 memorandums just over the last 10 months, you can see how expansive these issues have been. In response to those, there have been over 530 lawsuits filed against the administration over the last 10 months. That is a tremendous number of lawsuits that have been filed. I believe by last tally, the actual number was 547 lawsuits filed against the administration. Some of them have been blocked, some of them have been successful. Many of them are ongoing and still pending the outcomes. With anyone that has ever had any experience in litigation, knows that the process is very long. You might hear in the news as it relates to determinations of certain lawsuits that have been filed. What you're hearing I wish um, the media would do a better job of really explaining what is going on and not just simply providing TikTok headlines. But take a look into exactly what the decisions are, what they mean, and what they say and what they don't say. Um, for instance, as it pertains to um, the major blow that occurred as it relates to the lower courts being able to issue nationwide injunctive reliefs. Um, uh, Many of the topics, including birthright citizenship, um, have not been adjudicated on the merits. So the ultimate legal answer, the substantive answers have not been provided as of yet. But what is occurring is that when the lower courts issues an injunction, typically that's sufficient to have that far reaching for the entire federal agencies for all federal for the United States, so that each individual will not have to file their own lawsuits in order to seek the injunctive relief that one case can issue because the federal edict affects everyone. So it didn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense to have individual lawsuits filed. Well, what occurred, obviously, is that when that was taken to the Supreme Court on something called the Rocket Docket, which is a fast track to the Supreme Court, they don't weighing in on the merits, but they do indicate that the lower court's decision has been temporarily lifted while the merits of the case have been argued. So while they have not stated that the actions are constitutional, what they are doing is exchanging de jure for de facto. So while the jury means it's legally sound, it's legal, the legal means of doing things, and weighing on whether or not it's constitutional, they've taken that part out of it and delayed that part of it. But what you're left with is de facto rulings. So, for instance, when it comes to the federal workers, when that stay was lifted, the reason that stays are put in place is because there are damages that occur if the stay is not put in place and you can't simply cure those damages. So while they discuss and argue as far as the legality of the federal workers and agencies being closed, Supreme Court has lifted the injunctive relief so that they can move forward with it and address the matter later. So that ends up being a de facto thumbs up for the administration to continue going. So uh, whether it's constitutional that they lost their jobs is still being argued, but in the meantime, they've lost their jobs. So that's what I mean by de jure versus de facto. And it seems as though every executive order that uh, is causing harm, and the lower courts puts a stop to it because it is unconstitutional. The 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 mode the modus operandi is to don't worry about if it's unconstitutional. Let's just get it done right now, which is why you see so many rocket dockets being sent to the Supreme Court so that they can just lift the stay and not really determine whether or not it's constitutional or not. So with that being said, with over 500 lawsuits being filed and many of them ongoing right now in the lower courts, with New York itself being a part of several different lawsuits, ranging from everything from um, the issue with the wind energy subsidies that have been stopped, to climate change issues, to the granting of loans that have been held up, to the deportation matter, to the birthright citizen matter. There have been New York itself has been a party to lawsuits against the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, DOGE, ICE, the Department of Justice. So New York, with as a state, is fighting back. Um, and Barbara mentioned the League of Women Voters are, believe there are two that I'm aware of that have been filed on behalf of the League of Women Voters. One in April and one just recently, I believe, over the last couple of days. So there are agencies that continue to fight back. There are law firms. Some have bent the knee. Some are fighting back. One of the instances is when as it pertains to any type of DEI initiative. The administrations threaten very powerful law firms to bend the knee, to capitulate to what they would want to do and provide them free legal services. um, if they did not, then they would lose all access to public buildings. If that attorney worked for that law firm, they would lose access to to federal buildings. They would lose their security clearance. And while you saw some law firms capitulate and agree to provide, $50 million worth of free legal services to the administration, others like Perkins Coie fought them back and actually won their particular case. You see it in the educational field, whether it's Columbia, Harvard, Yale. Um, there's extensive litigation that is going on, and is going on from states, is going on from the attorney generals of those states. It's happening with nonprofits. It's happening with education, universities and colleges. It's happening with businesses. It's happening with law firms. So there's a full ungarnered attack on the United States Constitution, and you'll see uh, um, organizations that typically are very silent on matters such as this have come out in against the actions of this administration. The American Bar Association has come out against it. The National Bar Association have come out against it. Um, so that's my overarching spiel as it relates to the executive orders, the lawsuits, and who are fighting back, the entities that are fighting back, the individuals that are fighting back. And for the most part, as you see in the lower court systems, whether they're a Republican appointee, a Democrat appointee, whether they're a Biden Obama appointee, or whether they're a Trump appointee, by and large part, the lower court judges have been really our last line of defense as it relates to some of the policies and executive orders that have come down, in making sure that the rule of law is not completely whittled away. However, uh, when it comes to their ruling, a lot of their stays are being overturned. The stays are being overturned, the merits of the case are not. So that's something to be very mindful of. And with that, if there's questions dealing with specific questions, executive orders, attacks, and like I said, I know it's far reaching. There were attacks on the ACA as it pertains to pre-existing condition, with executive orders that went out in regards to that. Some of the more obscure things that have everyday ramifications for people. They attack the cap on medication. So on insulin, they attack those and by executive orders and proclamations. So the independencies of agencies, the USDA.
All right, I see that Sarah Liebschitz has something she'd like to raise. You're still muted, Sarah.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I want to go back to the birthright citizenship case, where, as you said, the Supreme Court returned it with the limitation of jurisdiction of a single district court. But there, with a little caveat there, that class action suits could be initiated, or yes, that's the word. So could you
Mhm.
explain exactly how that would work and define class action suit to begin with?
Certainly. So, um, Judge Sotomayor really laid the underlying foundation in the ruling in the dissent to the birthright citizenship case, wherein the Supreme Court indicated that um, a nationwide stays were prohibitive. Um, in her dissent, she laid the foundation for how a class action suit can be filed in
Oh.
order to gain the type of stay that the court was previously able to do through
Mhm.
an individual case. So when it comes to certifying a class act, you have to be similarly situated. You have to have a representative group of the class that you're trying to certify. So, what attorneys and agencies and entities have done in order to push back, especially as it pertains to the birthright citizenship matter, is to sign up different individuals that meet the affected population. And once they're able to do that and they have the class action suit certified by the courts, then they're able to proceed and reinstate the injunction.
Mhm. So
So what?
does that mean babies already born to two parents, neither of whom was a citizen? Or does it mean going forward that these babies uh, would not qualify? What's the timing in terms of this?
Right. Well, they initially they wanted the executive order was going to be considered retroactive.
Oh.
Um, and so the class action, and forgive me, I haven't read through the class action lawsuits
Mhm.
that have come up since the Supreme Court ruling. However, um, trying to have the individual that is just born to sign on to a class action is impossible. It's an impossibility, which is one of the things that the justices stated in their dissent, in that trying to have uh, an individual that is effective and has standing as it relates to the executive order sign up would be an impossibility. So there are individuals that are retroactively affected by the executive order that have come through with the class action.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm a little, I'm not well informed on how the jurisdictions apply. So if you take all the people that would be affected by ending birthright citizenship, including
Mhm.
retroactively, they're spread all over the country. They're not in uh, whatever district that started
Right.
in. So if you certified a national class, then can you get a national restraining order or
No, because it's going to be jurisdictional. So
so you'd
what
have to have
and
one in
what
each jurisdiction or something?
state state-wise, which raises an entirely different, and I shouldn't say state, I should say the um the jurisdiction and not necessarily state, because there are 13 um jurisdictions that federal jurisdictions that the country is broken down into. So it's not necessarily by state, it's by jurisdiction. So um the issue comes about, and this is where um, eliminating the lower court's ability to issue a nationwide stay comes into play is because if you are in a state where your attorney general, for instance, um, is not a progressive litigator, is not pushing back on some of these policies, you literally have instances where if relief is going to be granted, that it would only be granted for that jurisdiction. So it really calls into question the quote unquote United States, where you'll have different jurisdictions with different rights. Um, so it's not necessarily it's going to go state by state per se, just because when you look at the second district, for instance, that includes New York, Connecticut, so on and so forth. So if you have cases that go up through the districts and there's rulings in the districts, then that will be satisfied for the district. So for the birthright citizenship case, there's been a case that was originated in um, there was one in New Hampshire, there was one in California, there's been one in New York, there's been one in trying to think, Massachusetts. Yeah, so but there's been several different jurisdictions that have raised a class action matter again as it pertains to the birthright citizenship.
So I have a kind of a big picture question. So certain of the things that he's done are just so transparently unconstitutional that litigation seems like the way to go, like birthright citizenship and uh, trying to dictate from Washington how elections are run, where the Constitution clearly says the states decide that. But a lot of the things he's done, like when he is closing down departments and programs that were approved by Congress, or
Mhm.
it seems to me there would be room for, if we had a legislature that's willing to fight with them, that they could accomplish a fair amount.
Oh yes, yes, yes. So right now you have um nonprofits, entities, attorney generals, and individuals that are doing the job that Congress should be doing. You have the lower courts that are doing their constitutional job. The Supreme Court is another question. But having said that, if the House of Representatives and senators were to operate as their proper checks and balances, especially when it deals with the attack on the independency of federal agencies, the Department of Education, for instance, or federal workers, or anything that occurred as it relates to Doge and the Privacy Act, as far as the information that was provided to them. Any of a number of different things. Um, Congress has the authority in order to step in and to stop what has been going on, especially as it pertains to the federal agencies. But they have, obfuscate. They've given up their constitutional right in order to act as a check and a balance. So
So as
that's
far as
what.
a group like the League goes, trying to ask congressional candidates, would you be willing to stand up for, would you take on the role that you have of checks and balances? That would be
Yes,
a completely useful approach to trying to elect a Congress that would do something.
I think that's essential. I think that having a representative, whether it's in the House of Representatives or a senator, that um, understands that the country comes first, country before party, and the people that you represent before the individuals in that party is something that has to be asked and has to be demanded of. Um, they have a responsibility in order to not just rubber stamp anything that the executive branch does. And right now, we're not seeing that.
Yeah, we're not.
I don't want this, I don't want to monopolize, but I am looking at the Constitution. I am looking at Section 8, which is part of Article 1, which has to do with the legislative branch, to ask you, this is one of the powers of the Congress, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Is it the necessary and proper clause that pertains to the creation and the approval of departments in the executive branch? Is that where that comes from?
Right. So any entity, any agency that is created by Congress, only an act of Congress um can disband or eliminate that agency. So and that's why as it pertains to the Department of Education,
Yeah.
that you can't just simply cancel or enclose the doors of the Department of Education by executorial fiat. It has to be an act of Congress. But what the workaround, this is where it comes from the jury to de facto. The de facto um, issue is that the executive branch is terminating the employment of federal workers that are protective, civil servants that are protected. They've gone through and reclassified a number of them to have them be able to terminate their employment. Some of them are terminated, some of them are relocated to other agencies, and without Congress that could put a stop to it, um, it's left the unions and the workers themselves to bring lawsuits to stop it. And that's another one where, for instance, the shutdown that occurred and them laying off and not returning certain workers, part of the quote unquote agreement, the concession was that they would bring back the federal workers that were laid off as a result of the shutdown. But they can turn right back around and terminate them again. Um, and the Supreme Court has stated that the administration can do that while the cases are going through the lower courts. But that is another instance where Congress can put a stop to it, and they choose not to. So there are a number of powers that the Congress are electing not to enforce. The fiscal powers that they have as it pertains to once funds have been allocated. If the funds have already been allocated for a particular agency for a particular purpose, they can't be redirected. But it takes them it takes their oversight in order to make sure that that occurs. But they're not having any oversights in regards to the funding that was already allocated.
Hmm. So a lot of the things that I'm watching happen. So let's take Lee Zeldin just walking back so much at the EPA. So if the federal government is not going to regulate pollution, then various states are perfectly willing to start regulating pollution. And I think about if I were an oil company executive, suddenly I have 50 different sets of regulations I have to learn about and comply with. It doesn't feel like progress to me in serving the interests of the oil companies. So I keep waiting for some people to realize that this is craziness. It's not even sensible robber baron behavior. uh, and I haven't yet seen people come to that conclusion and start uh, asking for common sense, but it's one of the things that could happen that would be really good when it does.
So it's a right now what's happening is an attack on all sides. So you have the rollback of the EPA regulations, right?
Mhm.
But then you also have the terminations of the Department of Justice attorneys, who would be the ones that would stand in place and file these particular lawsuits. So if you have the rollback of the protections, you have the misinterpretations of protective statutes, as far as what the EPA chooses and not to enforce, and then you have the DOJ, who has the jurisdiction to enforce the environmental protection um, uh, codes and statutes, and not only that, but also for the civil lawsuits as it pertains to um, Cancer Alley and a whole host of other um, a whole host of other lawsuits that were years and years old already that they have started to pull out of and settle. So it's not just current lawsuits that this affect. It's not just, I'm sorry, new lawsuits and new regulations that are being affected. It's lawsuits that are already and have already been in the system for several years that they have withdrawn from.
Mhm.
So as it pertains to one of the questions that you asked is as far as if you're a company and now you have to deal with all these different state regulations instead of a federal one, what you'll have is a race to the bottom because the same mentality that's on the federal level does affect some jurisdictions on the state level. So you'll have entities that are moved to um, certain jurisdictions, Texas being one, Tennessee being another, where you'll see a lot of these companies move to where they don't have to deal with any of the restrictions and regulations.
Yeah, although you also have the long-standing example of California being willing to take the lead on uh, pollution from automobiles that end
Mhm.
up becoming the federal standard because actually the auto companies don't like having different standards in different states.
Right, right. But it's short-term thinking,
Right.
short-term profit thinking,
Yep.
short-term profit.
Yep.
This is a consequence of the federal system. The Dodd decision overturning Roe v. Wade sent abortion back to the states. This is nothing very new. And it's perfectly legal.
Yes. So, and I apologize. I didn't even touch on during the opening salvo the attack on reproduction rights, and the attack on bodily autonomy. Um, that's
Yeah.
also a part of this. Um, yes. So, with the decision that quote unquote sends it back down to the states. What you start to see when you start looking at these cases and you line up with the cases, you line up the suggested legislation bills that are coming down the pike right now. and you look at some of the federal funding and what's going on with that, and you start to see a clearer picture that it's not quote unquote returning to the states or states' rights, but it's an effect to weaken it so that you can do a national edict and implementation as it pertains to bodily autonomy, as it pertains to women's rights. You have bills that's going on right now in that um, the the defunding any type of birth control as it pertains to being available through the ACA. And that is something that's being discussed, that if that goes through, it won't even matter anymore what your state says if it's not seen as, if it's on a banned substance for federally, then it affects what your state can do, even if you live in a quote unquote progressive state that is more inclined to have bodily autonomy. So that's a bill that's coming down the pike as well right now. Um, you have the NIH that's attempting to have the and I forgot the actual name of the drug, but they're trying to have that listed as a banned substance as well. Um, and then
Mephistoprone, is that what you're?
yes,
Okay.
as a
Yeah.
banned substance. Yeah. Um, and then you had the Voting Act, and I apologize, I'm drawing a blank right now. The Voting Rights Act that was bandied about that would essentially um, affect married or divorced women in that they would have to re-register under their birth name and not their married name. And was it the
The SAVE Act.
Save Act? That's what it was. Yes. So, um,
All right, I see we have a new question coming in from Pat Willis. Pat, why don't you turn on your microphone?
I, is it possible that what we're seeing happening points out that the Constitution is not as sturdy as we believed when it can be manipulated in this way? Is that what is we're realizing?
hmm. so, yes and no. Yes and no. Um, the Constitution itself, um, if you look at the document and you look at all the amendments, but beyond that, you look at the federal statutes, the codes and regulations that are built upon the Constitution itself. They're very, very thorough. And while obvious changes need to be made and some additional safety needs to be added into the law as it pertains to um, certain ambiguous areas. Um, I'm a believer that the law itself and the codes and the regulations and the interpretations of those have a great foundation in upholding um, civil rights, um, and so on and so forth. The issue is not necessarily the words on paper. The issue, obviously, is those um, that would interpret it, because uh, you can add every protection that you want as far as words are concerned. If you have individuals that coalesce enough people, enough support to ignore the obvious reading of those words, then we end up in the situation that we are right now. For instance, the 14th Amendment can't be any clearer when it states that those that are any person, not citizen, any person um, that is born in the United States and under the subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is a
Right.
citizen thereof. That can't be any clearer. All you have to do is be a person, and then the other part you have to be subject to. Now, that subject to is clearly defined as, does the United States have the ability over you, have jurisdiction over you? And the obvious answer to that is, and they've defined it before, is that if you are an invading army, then they don't have jurisdiction on you. If you are a diplomat, then quote unquote, they don't have jurisdiction over you. By and large part, that's it. Everyone else that's here, they have jurisdiction over, because you have to abide by the laws of the land. So the words are very clear and simple. The people that are bound, that are intent on not listening to those words is the issue. So I don't think you can add enough protections that would outweigh individuals that are intent on ignoring that. In the past, what has happened is that there's been enough people of goodwill to, one, stand up against it, or two, not participate in it, to prevent what's transpiring right now.
So what we need is not to rewrite the laws and the constitutions primarily. It's to be brave enough to stand up to just trampling on them.
Right. There's a reason why the lower courts, they keep losing in the lower courts.
Yeah, because even all those Trump appointees are ruling against him. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, they have lifetime tenure.
Okay, I see some more questions. Mary Mickett, you raised your hand first, and then we'll go to Catherine Smith.
So thinking hopefully, if the administration was to change in 2 more years, or 2 and 3, I guess, unfortunately, how much?
It's only been 10 months.
I keep hoping, but if we can make a change in the administration, and how much of what you see being taken away as far as federal government support, what is going to be the mechanism to bring it back? Is it going to be Congress? So we have to change not only the presidency, but the Congress to get people to stand up and say, okay, we're going to have a reasonable immigration plan. We're going to have education department. We're going to.
Yes. So there has to be a short-term and a long-term planning to one, reverse what has already occurred, and to two, make sure that we never come back to this. So in the short term, yes, there has to be elections that change the structure of the federal government, and the local and state government. That can't be stressed enough. And I say especially the local side, because when we're looking at the long-term issue is education. The long-term issue has to be focused on education. I believe the study stated that most of the school children are read at a third grade level or below. 54% of Americans read and comprehend at a sixth grade level or below. That is atrocious. And when you have that level of lack of understanding, analysis, and reasoning, then it's very easy for individuals to, one, be misled, and two, be ardent and stubborn while they're being misled. I believe it was Mark Twain that says it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. And long term has to be done on a local level. It has to be done with education. It has to be done with the Board of Education, and it has to be done with the standards and requirements as it relates to reading and comprehension, and making sure that children have the proper tools in order to be able to critically think about what's going on. And I have 4 children, and civics is a big thing. No one really understands and knows civics anymore as it relates to it being taught in schools, because it's not. And having children and going over with them what they're going through, what they're covering, and then going over what's going on in the news and the makeup of the Congress, what gerrymander means, all these things that we personally, my wife and I personally, do in our home, is not being done in schools. And I believe I live in a quote unquote good school district.
And
So it
in a
doesn't
blue
matter.
state too. I mean,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, Kathy Smith, you had your hand up a few minutes ago. Kathy, did you want to raise something?
Does she hear you?
I don't know. She doesn't seem like she is. There she is.
Okay. Article 3. Sarah, I don't have my constitution in front of me, so correct
do.
me. Um, Article 3, the Supreme Court,
Yeah, right.
is it explicit on Supreme Court members can be impeached? There's a process? And if so, please remind me if that has occurred, that the process to impeach a Supreme Court member, and was it successful or not?
Off the top of my head, I can't recall.
There have to,
Sarah's
Oh.
got her constitution
Oh.
right in front of her.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think impeachment, I'm looking at Article 1.
Okay.
It's the Congress that,
Uh-huh.
the House that impeaches. It's sort of like a grand jury, and then
Uh-huh.
the Senate tries
Uh-huh.
and finds guilty or not guilty. And there have been occasional cases of what were they? Lower officers, let me say, of the although I don't know if the Supreme Court would like being called as, an lower office, but there have been a few cases of impeachment of lower level
Federal judges.
federal judges.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't happen very often.
Uh-huh.
And of course, it's difficult to impeach. That's why
Mhm.
well, I forget, I used to know this, how many presidents have actually been impeached, but none has been convicted
Uh-huh.
because it requires an unusual majority, a high majority in the Senate.
Yeah.
I think that that what we are seeing here is the consequence of a person, this is Donald Trump, who won the trifecta. He won the presidency, he won majorities in both houses, and he has, because of his own appointments in his first term and in his second term, a 6-3 built-in majority in his favor. So I think that of course I'm not a lawyer, and I understand where you're coming from, of course, and I respect the profession greatly. I think that the issue right now before us is not electing a Democrat to the presidency. That isn't going to come until 2028. But next year will be the midterm election. Two things, I think. First of all, if the party that is a minority currently gains majority control of both houses, then you have a very different situation in in vis-a-vis the president. If one house only gains a majority, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the Congress.
Yeah.
But
My question regarding the court, and
yeah,
it doesn't have to be the Supreme
well,
Court, but I
Catherine,
think
yeah, go ahead.
there are questions about the ethical behavior
Exactly,
of our
exactly.
members. And I think it might be helpful to citizens to have some understanding of, since they don't have the rules that the federal judges have for their individual behavior, public behavior,
Mhm.
private behavior. But I'm a little fuzzy on whether we've ever been even started a process of saying we have a member of the Supreme Court that should be removed by the Congress. And I don't recall, Sarah.
Well, I think there are two answers to your question, which of course is a very good one. I think that it would be up to the Supreme Court itself
Okay.
to
Oh,
adopt a code of ethics. I, Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bascoe, but I don't think the Supreme Court has ever had such a code of ethics. The second point I would make is that when Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a big majority in both houses of the Congress, and of course he was elected several times, as we know, the Supreme Court at the beginning of his New Deal legislation was finding every bill unconstitutional. And so he proposed court packing. And that was for every justice who reached the age of 70, there would be a new justice to expand the court up to, what was it, 12 maybe, I think. So, but that never went anyplace because some of the justices, one in particular, began to change his mind about this unconstitutionality business. Another one left the court. And so then Roosevelt had a court that he liked. So this court packing never went through Congress. And the president was pretty happy with what happened.
Yeah.
But
Okay, I think Duwaine
Well,
has been trying to get a word in here.
sure, good.
No,
All right, now
no,
stop talking.
no. So, a few things. Yes, the Supreme Court has a code of conduct that they adopted for themselves. The issue is that they hold themselves accountable, so they don't have anyone else that can hold them accountable. Whereas all federal judges have a code of ethics that if they don't hold to that code of ethics, they can be removed, and often are. Um, as it relates to impeaching um, a, a Supreme Court justice, there's been one that was quote unquote impeached, but they were never removed, and that was back in the 1800s. But the same process, they have to be indicted, impeached by the House, and then convicted and removed by the Senate. So
Okay.
it's it's a far cry as far as that occurring. The other part of the question, though, is something that theoretically can happen, as far as the packing the court. And there's a good rationale for it. There's no hard and fast rule that it has to stay at 9. It's
That's
been
right.
as small as 6, and there's been as many as 10
Yeah.
before in the past. Now it's been at 9 for over 100 years now, but that's just uh, call it tradition. There's nothing holding it to be at 9. And all it would take would be a bill passed through Congress and signed by the president. That's all it would take in order for that to occur. And there is push to have 13 justices so that it could be one for every appellate jurisdiction of the United States. There's 13 appellate jurisdictions in the United States. There's a push right now to try to have 13 justices, one for each appellate jurisdiction. So there is a groundswell for that. Matter of fact, in one of his rants, the president mentioned that if he loses, what's going to happen as far as statehood for Washington D.C. and Puerto Rico, and then what follows is a bill that passes and signed into law that ups the number of justices to 13, which would make sense as far as matching in the appellate um, jurisdictions. But that's all it would take is a bill from Congress and signed by the president. And absolutely, sir, as far as what Roosevelt threatened to do, and the threat of it alone kind of, knocked some sense into the justices, even though his own party frowned on that and won't support him in the packing of the court. And he had a veto. He had what 60. He had a simple majority in both, I believe, during that period. So
Mhm. Okay, other comments or questions, directions you want to take conversation? So on a day-to-day basis, do you feel hope or despair more strongly?
I think it fluctuates between the two.
That's a good answer.
I find frustration in individual conversations that I have um, with people that are one, oblivious to what goes on, two, know that something is wrong that's happening, but don't have the information to understand why what's going on is happening. Um, because I no longer have any expectations for certain individuals. So that doesn't bother me, and their actions don't bother me. What bothers me more is the lack of a response, lack of a coordinated response, I would say, and being a part of several different groups that uh, promote education, strategies, and different ways in which we can push back. Um, and it's always, uh, 2 to 300 email serve, and then 13 at the meeting. So those are the times that I get frustrated. But um, when I look up and I see wins, whether it's in the lower courts or through agencies, then I'm always it always turns around.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming and talking with us tonight. Pat, you had a final question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I sometimes feel a sense of desperation because it's what, 10 months in, and you figure, another 12, 13, 14 months. And I think what further damage can be done. And even though there would be the will and ability to perhaps redress that, where would we be in another 14 months? That's where I feel pretty desperate, really desperate. And sometimes it's very difficult to feel hopeful in this short term that we're dealing with, in this just very short period that we're dealing with.
I
Can you be
completely
hopeful?
understand.
You want me to be hopeful?
Well, yes, and here's where I'm about to go with this. And I can't believe I forgot to mention it. Um, Federally, and then obviously is extending to the states and to local activities as well. But when you take a step back and you look at locally what's going on locally, I think that gives you hope. When you turn off from federal and you look local, because locally you have tremendous wins that are occurring. Locally, you can push you could push the Board of Education. Locally, you could push your mayor or your comptroller. Locally, there have been wins that have come up in education, in jobs, in funding. When you're looking at New York as a whole and some of the legislation that have come in, where it's going to um, withhold for every dollar that the federal government elects not to send to New York that they're obligated to. New York is prepared to withhold federal dollars going to the federal government. And when you look at locally what's going on within the state, within your city or town, I think there's plenty to be hopeful for.
All right. Well, I notice how often you've talked about civic education, and that's our next big push now that the election's behind us. So this is excellent timing to get us all excited to come back to the table, get down to work there. Okay, so once again, thank you very much.